Today, I'm excited to welcome Tali from Orange Hatter Podcast for Women in Bitcoin. Tali is also a relationship builder, retreat organizer, Bitcoin educator, and co-founder of Free Market Kids with her husband Scott, which educates about Bitcoin through games. Her newest endeavor is Super K Adventures. We'll talk about that.
Yes.
So welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Tali.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great to see you. But before we get into Bitcoin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
About myself, gosh, I'm an immigrant. I came to the States when I was 10 years old, and I followed the traditional path. I worked really hard. I was wanting to be a doctor first, and got into school, realized I didn't want to go into medicine, started working, and then decided to go back to get my MBA because I was like, okay, if I'm not going to be a doctor, I don't know what to do. I guess I'll go into business. So that's where I met my husband. And the original plan for me was to go into investment banking. So for my summer internship, I worked in London. I really wanted to be in Europe. Most of my classmates went to New York. And then Scott and I got married, and I was holding my first baby in my arms. I had a nanny all lined up. I was going to, hold her for a few months, enjoy her, and then I was going to go back to work. That was the original plan. And I was holding the baby in my arms, and I thought, if I go back to investment banking, I'm never going to see her. I'm going to leave the house before she wakes up. I'm going to get home after she goes to sleep. She's not going to know me. I'm not going to know her. And it just broke my heart. I didn't want that. So I talked to Scott and I said, I'm staying home and you're going to have to pay for 2 sets of student loans. And he said, okay. And that was it. Then we had more kids, and I came across homeschooling very much by accident. I never planned to homeschool. I always planned, even though I was staying home with the kids, that they would go to private school and follow that traditional path. They were going to get a good education, go to good school, and they were going to get whatever excellent traditional job, and they were going to be successful, happy people. And that was the plan. It didn't work out that way because somebody introduced me to homeschooling. I decided, there's a whole story behind that, but I decided to homeschool my kids. And that's what I did for the last basically 20 years. I have 4 kids. They all graduated. And when they all left the house, I looked at my husband like, what are we going to do now? and in that time, we actually fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So we decided to just commit our full-time, both Scott and I, into Free Market Kids. And then from there, I rolled out Orange Hatter and now Super K Adventures.
Wow. It sounds like you've done a lot in a short amount of time.
Yes, we're very passionate.
I want to hear about the homeschooling, but I read on your website, orangehatter.com, that your husband was trying to orange pill you for about 2 years.
Yes.
So what eventually got you into Bitcoin, and what's your Bitcoin journey so far?
Okay, so it was around COVID when he started poking me and said, this Bitcoin thing, more and more people are talking about it. I really think we should try to understand it for the sake of our kids. And that's always sort of the key word, right? You have a trigger. Everybody has a trigger. Don't talk to me about anything unless you can tell me how my kids can benefit, because that was sort of the mindset I was in. And right around that time, I was also trying to graduate 4 students. So my kids were raised in a one schoolroom kind of setup. And so my oldest, when my oldest started high school, my youngest was in the same room. So he kind of just got exposure to high school material. So they kind of all graduated around the same time. And as a homeschooling parent, when we go through that college application process, I was basically on the line for everything. I was a teacher who had to write the recommendation letters. I was the guidance counselor. I had to create all of their curriculum for their transcript. And because we were homeschooling, they don't just want to see a transcript. They want to see like the entire syllabus for every class, all the assignments, how the assignments are great, everything. Like they wanted to know everything. So it was a full-time job. I was trying to get them ready for college application process. And that was when Scott was poking me and saying, hey, we need to learn this thing about Bitcoin. Here's a podcast. It's 2 hours long. Here's a book, it's 500 pages. Here's a video done by like an MIT professor. It's only 15 minutes and it'll just make it so crystal clear to you. And none of it, like either I didn't have the time to do it because I just didn't see why I should spend my time there because my to-do list was so long. Or I did watch like the short ones, like the 15-minute explanation on the SHA-256 and blockchain technology, all that stuff. And Scott said, isn't it so clear now? Isn't it like crystal clear to you? I'm like, no, everything is Greek. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Like, stop bugging me. But he didn't stop because he kept hearing it on different podcasts because he's always listening to a podcast. And he said, I really think this is important. We need to understand this. So sort of out of desperation, one day he just said, listen, I'm going to explain the blockchain to you with some things on the table, like something I can move around and ask questions directly, right? So he took out some mahjong tiles, he took out some playing cards, and he started just writing things on these cards. And he goes, this is how a transaction is made. This is how the blockchain connects, a previous block to the next block and the next block and all that. And he's like, do you understand now? And I just looked at him like, I don't even think you're speaking English. Like, what are you? So that's why it took him 2 years. And he finally got to the point where he was like, I'm just going to create a whole game. And to help me with a prototype, would you please play this game? And that's how he got me to interact with it. And once I was at least somewhat convinced that something that is digital cannot be copied and can be used as money, I was like, fine, send me one of your darn, Bitcoin books. I will read one book for you, And I did. I read the book called Bitcoin Hard Money You Can't F With by Jason Williams. And it got me so angry. I'm telling you, Paula, I would listen to a chapter and I would have to stop it and I would have to calm down and then read the next chapter like next week or something. It took me several months to finish this one book. And afterwards, I was straight down, like a vertical slide down the rabbit hole. I'm like, Scott, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? Why didn't you like grab me by the shoulders and sit me down to tell me about this? And he was like, I tried for 2 years. So that's how I entered the Bitcoin space. And right around that time was my kids had graduated and I was done homeschooling. And Scott and I were talking one day and I said, listen, if you were able to convince me, and I'm pretty stubborn, if you're able to convince me with this game, maybe other people can use it to help their family and friends learn about Bitcoin enough so that they're willing to read the first book because they just need to read one book, right? So he agreed and we started traveling with the game. Like we would just reach out we went on meetup.com and I'll just type in Bitcoin and just go down the list and I would just write to the organizers, like, can we bring our game to you and just show it to your club? And maybe your family, friends can come for game night. This is just a really fun way of exposing them to Bitcoin without lecturing them. Because I think that's what, like most people, if they can smell a lecture coming on, immediately we shut down. True. With our kids, with our family, it doesn't matter. If I smell a lecture, I'm like, oh my God, I was traveling with Scott and I just noticed that at most of the places we went to, there were very, very few women present. And even the women who were present, a lot of them went there just to support whoever they went with. And they're on their phone and they're scrolling and they're kind of like listening, but not really listening. So they're looking up, looking down, and they're just not really there. And I would go up to them and I was telling them like, why are you here? My name is Tali. It's nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And I like 9 times out of 10, they are so intimidated by the conversation that's taking place at these meetups that they're just like, I don't understand what they're saying. I'm just here to support him. So because of that, I started the Orange Hatter podcast. And my goal was to bring women just a little bit closer to the Bitcoin rabbit hole, just kind of take a little peek in, not very technical. We don't go into any like, oh my God, the government is bad and the money printing and everything is going to hell. Like none of those, just who are you? Tell me about yourself. How did you come across Bitcoin? Why is it important to you? That's all we want to know as women. Why should I bother, looking at this? And then I realized like if they get interested, I need to bring them somewhere. So I started an online reading club, and we meet every week because I think that sort of frequency of seeing each other is really important for building relationship. And the last book that we did was Lynn Alden's Broken Money. There's 40 chapters. We took 40 weeks, chapter by chapter, and we read it, we discussed it, we asked each other about our week, who's moving, who's, got a sick family member, who can we pray for, that kind of stuff. So it was wonderful because honestly, if I had read Lynn's book myself, I would have said, wow, that's really interesting. And at the end of it, you asked me, what did you learn? I couldn't really tell you because I didn't take the time to slow down and really digest it. But because we were meeting weekly and we talked about each chapter, it forced me to really digest the information and internalize it. And so now I can explain things a little bit better, even to other Bitcoiner women. So I started that. And then I realized after I started that there are a lot of women who are looking at this space, and men too, really. Everybody wants to work for something that they believe in. Like everybody wants to work in the Bitcoin space. Well, what I realized was there's a group of women who are entrepreneurs and they're entering the Bitcoin space and they want to do something in the Bitcoin space as an entrepreneur that can sustain, like basically make the income that they need to live on. So then I created a mastermind. We get together weekly. Again, we help each other, we support each other, we cross promote, and it just kind of grew from there. I can talk for an hour, but anyway, I'll stop there.
I love it. I love it. I just want to go back to when your husband was orange pilling you. It sounded like you didn't see a problem, but when you read that book and you were getting angry, you saw the problem. Because
Yeah.
so whether that was saving for your future or getting your kids through college, so what was the problem you saw?
The problem I saw was okay, and now just to kind of emphasize, I went to Yale to get my MBA. And I did not understand how money worked. That was the part that pissed me off the most because I consider myself educated. I'm an educated person, but when they started talking about how money actually worked, because when you're in business school and they talk about the money supply, you go directly into calculating the formula and things. But what I didn't realize was how the system benefited the fringe people close to the system, and everybody else is just kind of like that. Like I don't even know the right word to describe it. But like that, I think in pictures. So in my head, that's the picture. You have like a bullseye,
Yeah.
and then you have the rest of the circle, right? So we're all kind of standing out here, and we're working really hard. We're climbing the corporate ladder. But if you're not on the in club, then you're just basically on different parts of the circle. You're not in the bullseye. And that's what made me angry, especially because Scott went through 2008 and was one of the 40,000 people laid off by his company. His company laid off 40,000 people, most of them in the same town. That's what we were. So the job market crashed, the real estate market crashed. And what I noticed was that when I was trying to explain to my kids as they were getting older about the economy, I could not understand why 2008 happened because I was watching the news and I was trying to understand. I didn't really have time to go into depth with different books. We did read some books and we're just trying to understand why did that happen? Because there's a lot of people with sound bites, and I didn't like that. But when I was listening to Jason's explanation, all the questions I have fell into place, like everything clicked in. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the big picture that I missed this whole time. And then I was really sad that number one, I bought into the illusion that if you work really hard and you're honest and you provide a value, you would be okay. Like you would have security in life. And that's not true. And then I was mad again because that was what I taught my kids. Because Scott and I were very intentional. We wanted to make sure our kids understood economics because we both felt that we were somewhat blind as we were going through school. So we wanted to make sure, because we were homeschooling and we had the option of choosing curriculum for our kids. Even when our kids were very little, we were already doing accounting with them. The lemonade stand, what is What are the financial statements? We play cash flow for kids with them. We bribe them with jelly beans to make sure they played it once a month. We wanted to get them out of the rat race because we were in the rat race. So we were really intentional. And then to come across this book at the end of my homeschooling journey and realize that I've been teaching them wrong, that was a huge slap in the face.
So what did you do about that? So basically, I just want to go over what you said. So people closest to the money printer do the best in this system.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are all taught Keynesian economics rather
Mm-hmm.
than Austrian.
Mm-hmm.
So some people don't even know what's going on. And yeah, well, 2% and 3% inflation is normal. But so how did you go back and teach your kids? Well, oh, now we got some new lessons for you.
Well, see, that's the problem, because by the time I realized what was actually happening and I understood the big picture, how the money system works, like even beyond economics, just how money works, I had already graduated them. So at this point, 3 of them were overseas. So they were learning other life lessons. The one that I had at home, I had taught him so well that he really challenged me when I started talking about Bitcoin. All of them challenged Scott and I. They thought we were being scammed. They thought they kind of lumped Bitcoin with cryptocurrencies, but they were also at that age, where they think parents don't know anything. Like they, unfortunately, that was the age where we came into Bitcoin. They're like, oh, mom and dad have lost it. They have been, they succumbed to the scammers, and oh my God, and it was just kind of bad timing. But I also feel like there's a reason for the timing as well, because they challenge us in a way that makes our teachings better, because we don't assume anything when we talk to people. We don't assume that they would be willing to hear us, or that they see even they interpret the same facts the same way, because we would of course send them the podcast we listen to the same way that Scott did it, right? We also had the games and other things, but we were seeing through a complete different set of lens than the kids were seeing. We're looking at the same thing though. And we're just like, we taught you. How can you not trust what we're saying? And this is what I get from them. They said, well, Mom, you told us not to trust anything that comes across our path, and we should question. And we are questioning this. Like, darn it. You go question other people. You don't question me. So yeah, they keep us on our toes for sure. But yeah, the timing was, if I had known about Bitcoin when they were younger, they would have been brought up Bitcoiners. There's not even a question.
So
But
this is part of their journey. Are they on the Bitcoin train now, or are they still on their journey?
so when I came across Jason's book, I told all 4 of them about it. Now, at the time, again, I had graduated them, so I wasn't in a position where I can say, you have to read this for school. Read it at your own discretion, but understand that I'm strongly encouraging you read it. 1 out of 4 read it, and she said, okay, I get it, kind of. I'm willing to put some money behind it. So I'm like, cool. Another one, I kind of like sneakily got her into my podcast production process, and she was my editor. And she had edited probably 4 or 5 podcasts when I asked her if she would be willing to put some, money into Bitcoin. And she said, well, all these women are talking about it. Not mom, right? All these women are talking about it. I guess there's something to it. So she goes, okay. My 2 other kids, one is going in purely for numbers go up, because that's just the way he thinks. I'm like, I don't care, do what you got to do. The other one is very, very skeptical still. Yeah.
Great. Yep. Part of the journey, right?
Part of the journey. What can you
That's,
do?
yeah. And just since you have talked about your homeschooling, as a kid, my mom was a teacher, but there was no way I could have been homeschooled by her. So I can see you're a very warm, loving person, and I can see now that you get to teach your kids what you want to teach them, which is great. but it's probably not for everybody because not every mother is the perfect teacher or father, right? Or is there a way around that?
There's absolutely a way around that. I do absolutely believe, unless there's some kind of abuse happening in the relationship, kids want to learn from their parents the most up to a certain age, right? Once they get to late teens, you're like, okay, we don't need to learn anything from mom and dad. But when they're little, for sure, there's nobody else in the world they would rather learn from. You're in such a special position in your child's eye, right? Maybe you're not the best person to teach academics, but absolutely you are the best teacher, hands down. I will never question that. So, can you homeschool without teaching them academics? Yes, you can. So there's a spectrum of homeschooling in terms of teaching your kids. You have people who do everything themselves, like every subject from beginning to end. Then you have people who send their kids to what they call part-time private schools. I call it part-time private schools, but basically you don't teach anything. You're just the supervisor to make sure they do the homework that their teachers assign. So at least from at where we are, that's usually a 2 to 3 day school setup. You get to pick the teacher, the subject and stuff. You pay for the tuition and you just do like a drop off in the morning. You pick them up and you make sure they do their homework. That's also homeschooling. So you don't have to be the one teaching math or science or any subject that you hate or you feel really incompetent teaching. There's so many options. You can go online. Your kids can do everything at home. You can send them to the co-ops where the other parents teach. You can send them to the private schools where you have to pay tuition for your kids to be taught, but you still have the control over what they learn much, much better than if they went to a regular private school or a public school. So
That makes sense. Thank you.
mhm.
So, on your website, you have an amazing quote from Marianne Williamson. Our
Mhm.
deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure.
Yeah.
Do you think that women in particular struggle with this? And how does Bitcoin empower women?
I absolutely believe that women suffer from feeling powerless. And I don't even mean it in the way that feminists talk about. It's not about society oppression or even oppression from our male species, the male half of the species. It's not like that. It's just, I feel like we've been so conditioned by even just marketing to look at only the flaws that we have. And then when there's marketing to say, you are beautiful as you are, it's a very superficial, very shallow view of self. So there's marketing hurts you on both sides. They tell you, oh, you have this problem, we have a pill that can fix it. And in that way, it's taking the power away from yourself. And on the other side, they artificially praise you for no good reason at all. And so if you believe in it, if you believe in it with your head, in your heart, you still know that it's a lie. And so you're hurt on both sides. So with Bitcoin, well, here's the thing about Bitcoin. So not every Bitcoiner is going to like what I'm going to say, but I feel like Bitcoin is a freedom tool, but it's still just a tool. It is not the end all be all answer to happiness, like a lot of Bitcoiners would like to paint it as. I just think it's one of the solutions. So, for example, if you have a woman who feels disempowered or feels like she's weak in some way, and you go, Bitcoin can empower you because the alignment, because the energy is from two different, I'm going to get like kind of woo woo a little bit, two different vibrational levels, they're just not going to align. And you can have a lot of Bitcoin and still feel poor. So if you look at the people who say you got to hodl now because one day it's going to be $1 million. So you don't buy like socks without holes. Like when your socks have holes, you don't buy new socks, right? I've heard some people say I'm not going to get married because that money's going to go into Bitcoin. Or I'm not going to have children because that's too expensive. I'm going to put money in Bitcoin. I'm like, what then is the value of life? Are we going to be around when Bitcoin hits $1 million? And then what? Are you then going to sell it, or are you going to wait until it goes to $2 million? And so the empowerment, I feel like, has to go so much deeper. It is nothing more than a tool. Unless the woman herself feels empowered, she's not even going to see that tool as a tool to empower her because she's not going to align with it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, that absolutely makes sense. So Bitcoin can empower people in countries that don't have everything we have in this country, because it gives them, it's a freedom tool. But number one is you have to feel good about yourself and be enjoying your own life and be doing something that's empowering to you, which sometimes takes time. You seem to have a personal development type background. I heard you say that. What did you say that I read? That your thoughts have power.
Yes.
So that's a bit, woo woo, but I like that. Where do you think the first place that people need to start in order to start this empowerment journey?
Well, okay. So if we go take one more step back from empowerment, really you're looking at a sense of worthiness. So if I can make the assumption that the women we're trying to help in these countries that have oppressive regime, or they're refugees and they're escaping something, there are always people who are going to try to do something to better their condition, right? So whether that means they're leaving the country, or they're going to stand up for something, or they're going to help themselves by stashing away money that they can use later. Whatever their situation is, for them to make the decision to do something to help themselves, that means they have to first and foremost see themselves as worthy of the help. And if they don't see that, it doesn't matter what kind of tools they have, you know. And so, yes, we should tell people about Bitcoin as a tool, and I absolutely believe that. But I have also learned through repeated experience that if the person doesn't see a problem with what's happening in her life, there is absolutely nothing you can say that will get her interested in Bitcoin. Nothing. So first she has to recognize there's a problem, and then she has to see herself as being worthy of overcoming that problem. And then you say, oh, by the way, here's a tool and it's fantastic, and you can use it to benefit you in ways that are much better than fiat money. But until you get to that point, you're just blowing hot air because they're just not going to hear it. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, they're going to be like, oh my God, you're just like one of the scammers, or why are you trying to brainwash me? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So I just feel like those are the steps that we have to at least recognize we have to overcome. Then we can talk about Bitcoin as a freedom tool.
absolutely. I agree. You did 100 podcasts, is that
Mm-hmm.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you continuing with your podcasts?
I would like to continue. It's been delayed because every time I come across more data, I'm always collecting data, right? So if I see more data that makes me reconsider the presentation format of what I'm doing, I always want to be able to pivot myself. And so I've been thinking back and forth about season 2 because I wrapped up season 1 with the 100th episode. Season 2, I'm like, okay, do I continue to talk to women about their Bitcoin story, or do I go like what I was just saying before, like you got to take a step back and you got to address the very, very fundamental, which really is just a sense of worthiness. Until you see that, it just doesn't matter what we say. You can tell them to listen to these podcasts, and you're going to be like, oh, of course that woman can do that because this is her circumstance, but I've been abused, and I don't have $5 to put into Bitcoin because really what that means is I don't see myself worthy of getting out of whatever situation they're in. And the reason I say that is because just over the last couple of years, I'm just seeing more and more the darkness that a lot of young people feel because my kids are in college, and I hear them talk about their friends and what they observe on campus and things like that. There is a very, very deep problem that is not money based. I mean, it is money based in that their parents had to both work that's that trend, the empower the women can do everything. They can work and they can have a family. They can have it all. And just, quality time versus quantity time. Send your kids to daycare, but have a great vacation. They'll make up for it, that kind of thing. Like, yes, that was all money driven, but the generation we're trying to reach right now, Gen Z and younger, their darkness comes from just the sense of, and I'm totally generalizing, okay, totally generalizing. They have this darkness of unworthiness for various reasons, whether it is because people have told them because of the color of your skin, you've either been a victim or you've been the person, the oppressor. That has nothing to do with what they did personally, but other people are putting labels on them. It could be people are giving them spotlight on things that you and I, when we were little, would not have seen as a problem. So, for example, if my dad comes home from work, right, and he blows up on something, let's say he had a bad day and he just blows up, I'm just going to be like, okay, dad had a bad day, but just kind of go into my room until he calms down, right? But today, what are they labeled? They've been abused. That's verbal abuse. And you're like, oh my God, yes, you're right. I have been abused. I am an abuse victim. That's darkness that you're like putting into them. And so this whole new generation, if they don't inherently feel worthy for good things and they don't feel empowered to do something, to receive something better, we can be like, hey, here's a wallet and here's some sats and look at what you can do with Bitcoin. They're going to just be like, I don't care,
Do you think it's also, I think about this too. We hear fix the money, fix the world. And
Mhm.
yes, that will fix a lot of our problems. But also it seems like people have a lack of purpose. And like now you said, a lack of worthiness. But
Mhm.
so you are thinking about going to the next level to
Right.
do you think that that's before the fix the money?
Yes, because these are our leaders. These are our future leaders.
Yeah.
And it's really very scary, like how passive a lot of them are. Again, I'm generalizing based on what I hear of young people saying. Okay, so this is not scientific or anything, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to pivot my podcast, because I feel like I need to address something beyond just talking about Bitcoin. But so, okay, an example. I was talking to my daughter's friend the other day, and he was saying over summer he had a job with other college students, and if you tell them to do one thing, they will do that one thing because they're getting paid, but that's it. So, for example, it was an event planning company. And so they're dealing with food and caterers and changing schedules. Maybe the cake is coming late, or the table is not steady or something. Like, there's always unexpected things going on. And there were four college kids. If a grape rolled off the plate and fell onto the grass, they ask if they should pick up the grape before somebody stepped on it. And the question is, wow, like, why would they feel like they need permission to bend over and pick up a grape that has rolled up the table? I can think of two reasons. One, they've been trained their entire life to not do anything that the teacher doesn't tell them to do, right? And two, they think it's none of my business. So they're just like passive observers. It is what it is, and I'm just the recipient of the authority or the instructions or something. Another example is my son was working for a different company, and he was telling me, he says, my boss really loves me. And I said, why does your boss love you so much? He goes, I show up every day and I'm on time. And I said, that's it? That's that's what sets you apart. You show up every day, you show up on time. He goes, yeah, because other people, they don't show up every day. They just kind of like, I had too much to drink last night, I don't feel like going in, I'm just going to call in sick. And if they come in, they're late. I'm like, that's basic. Like, why do these kids think that that is okay? Well, because when they were going to school, if they were late, the parents called. They didn't call, the parents called. And the consequence that they received was always through the parent. And so How are we going to go to these kids and go, hey, let's talk about Bitcoin as freedom tech?
I think
Right?
that's such a good point. Such a good point. Yeah. When I was in school, uh, if I had a problem, my mom said, fix it. My
Right.
mom, fix it. You know,
Right.
and I am from Zimbabwe. I just want to mention this because I interviewed somebody who started Bitcoin Reach there, Alexandria, and he was, there's 95% unemployment there. People, I say, why don't people buy Bitcoin? He says the ones that do have any money, they rather go out drinking and partying. And so it's another issue in probably third world countries. But what you're saying about the kids here, I can very much see how it's become that. And I'll be looking forward to watching your next chapter in that.
Okay, so here's my solution, at least
Okay.
as of today.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, we have got to go younger.
Oh.
I don't know what to do with a college student's life. We'll have to teach them. And they have their own journey to walk. And I'm not saying everybody's the same. I'm just saying I don't feel like I'm the right person to be tackling that challenge. But I'm like, I can go younger because I love kids in an age where they still have love. Like there's no resentment, there's no judgment. They're just like, I love everything. Hey, let's go play in the water. Okay. Let's go play in the sun. Okay. Like everything is good. They're enthusiastic about everything. I love that age. And so I was just thinking, okay, this is what kind of led me to writing the Super K adventure is let's get to let's get to kids before they're contaminated by what's going on in society. So let's get back to the basics. And again, I'm addressing what I said before, which is they have to have a sense of self value that does not come from the teacher, society, their friends, social media, maybe not even the parent, because true self worth is internal. Nobody can give it to you. I try to give it to my kids, but no, they either have it or they don't. So what I wanted to address with that is with the Super K adventure books, um, of course there's the story. So the story is a 7-year-old boy, his name is K, and he gets into trouble and he's trying to work himself out of the trouble because nobody's bailing him out. His parents didn't bail him out. There's no bank or government coming in to bail him out. He made a mistake. He needs to make amends. So what does he do? He puts on a super cape and he's like, yes, I am super and I can do this. And so he does what he can as a 7-year-old boy to fix the problem. And so my call to parents at the end of the story is now let's bring that into your child's world and your child's psychology, right? So if you go on social media or read articles about parenting or you read articles by school teachers, you just see a lot of people putting labels on kids right away. Do you feel anxious? You want to talk about your anxiety? Do you feel safe? Do you feel unsafe? Do you feel like you fit in your body? Do you feel like stop spotlighting and help them? Like don't give them a magnifying glass to look for everything that's wrong because you'll find it. But let's spotlight what you're doing right. And so my call to parents at the end of the book is let's spotlight what your child does that's heroic. Heroism with the definition of making a positive difference in somebody else's life. It doesn't have to be big. Because I think today, when we think heroes, we're thinking like really big things like, I'm going to stop global warming. I'm going to save the rainforest. I'm going to like something huge, right? Like I'm going to help the entire homeless population in San Francisco. When you're 6 and 7, you have people in your life that you can make a positive change in. So, for example, if mom is tired, you go, hey, mom, here are your slippers. You bring her the slippers. In that moment, you made a positive difference in your mom's life. That makes you a hero in that moment. Let's celebrate that, right? If your little sister falls down and you help her up and she's crying, you give her a tissue. That's heroic to your sister in that moment. Let's spotlight that. And what is human nature? Human nature feels good when you're helping somebody. That's just human nature. Nobody has to be taught that. Nobody has to be like, oh, when you help somebody, you should feel good. we know it is our nature. And so we are not going to say, hey, if you help your sister today, you get a sticker on the refrigerator. That's external reward. You don't need that because he already feels good that he helped his sister. And let's spotlight that. And so that's my call and my sort of hope that if we have a generation of kids, 5, 6, 7 years old now, where they're being taught every day to look for ways that they're making a difference in other people's lives. And in that way, they feel powerful. They feel powerful. We don't tell them they're powerful. They feel and know they're powerful. They feel good. They feel worthy. They grow up. Then you tell them about Bitcoin. We have somewhere to go. And you don't just convert one person, you convert his peers, because his peers, if you grow up feeling like you are a powerful person who can make a difference, you're going to be a leader. You don't have to be taught leadership. You will be a leader. And so when you convert one child who's a leader, you convert his followers. That sounds so wrong. Like his friends. Let's just say his friends. But if you convert a passive child, at best you've converted one person. At worst, you converted nobody. So that's sort of my redirected attention is let's go younger. Let's like celebrate honesty and bravery and making a positive difference that's tiny. Like otherwise you wouldn't even pay attention to, but they accumulate, the compound effect, right? So that's my new direction.
I love that. I love that. You know, what I do on my podcast, I'm trying to reach the older generation, women and men, who's still trying to understand Bitcoin. So those 100 episodes you did, I'm going to listen to them. But what I wanted to know is what are some of the most important lessons you learned from those women and about Bitcoin?
I think the number one lesson is Bitcoin is important to people for different reasons, and we should never make any assumptions. So, for example, one of the ladies that I interviewed, she's a libertarian. She is absolutely motivated in every part of her life is motivated by her desire to have individual freedom. And so if I come in and talk to her about money or like it has better return, like Bitcoin has a better return than the stock market, she's not gonna care. Like who cares? She cares about her freedom. So you talk to her about the freedom aspect of Bitcoin versus another parent I talked to. She's into Bitcoin because she wants to save money for her kids' college. And she was comparing the return of Bitcoin, historic return of Bitcoin, to the historic return of the, I think it's like 529. It's like the 529 fund, the education fund, right? So it's like tax deductible when you're withdrawing it. I think it's after tax dollars when you put it in. So she's comparing the return of those two. So if you talk to her about freedom, she might care a little bit, but no, she cares that she's going to have enough funds to send her kids to college. So you got to talk to her about that. Another person I talked to, she's a retiree. She's in her late 50s and she's looking at the return for the next 10 to 15 years, not 30, right? 10 to 15 years, whether or not she should take her money out of her mutual fund or stocks and put into Bitcoin. You got to weigh the risk and the potential return, right? There's no guarantee either way anyway. But if you talk to her about freedom tech, she doesn't care. She's just not, that's not where her mind is. And so that's the number one lesson learned is you just need to know who you're talking to. If you're talking to a single woman in her 40s versus a married woman with children in her 40s, you got to tell them different things because they care about very, very different things. But if you always go in front of people and just like you have the same spiel about Bitcoin, you're going to lose most of them because maybe they don't care about, those 3 or 4 things, right? So that's definitely number one. Number two about Bitcoin is it's such a new ecosystem. I think we still have a lot of growing pains to go through. And I think it's naive to think that we have thought of absolutely everything. And it is absolutely going to be the only tool for the utopia I think that we're all looking for. I just think that that's naive. There's a lot of things that still need to be played out. And so, yes, you should put your money into Bitcoin, But should you believe that it will solve all your problems? I don't think so.
I like that reminder. Yeah, it's not going to solve all our problems.
Yeah.
What do you think the difference between how men and women think about it? You heard in your podcast, some women talked about fairness. I got the fairness thing. And that you said that many of them don't care so much about the technology. You know,
Hmm.
like if your husband had tried to get me with the mining, I would have been, who cares about the mining? but
Right.
but I do care about saving for my future because I'm responsible for my future.
Hmm.
And to save it in fiat, well, I'm not going to get very far. How do you think women and men differ in their approach to Bitcoin?
Okay, so I don't know if you know this book. It came out like decades ago. It's called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the major differences that book addresses is that men try to solve problems. They're problem solvers. And so when they are watching the news and women get annoyed because they're not in the kitchen helping them with dishes, it's because they're doing their job. They're supposed to be problem solvers. So they either solve their own problem, your problem, or the world's problem, right? And so I have found that when men get together, they get very big picture. They get very like what's going on with the government, the policy, and like the number of dollars that are being printed, and so much more macro view, and they get very worked up, very angry, and it's like they're just like trying to solve problems. That's the feeling that I get. Even the very, very techie discussions, when they get into the morality of making a feature this way or that way, they are still very high level trying to solve big problems. Whereas when I talk to women, it's a lot more of what does that mean for my children? Like I was telling you before, if Scott's trying to get my attention when I was deep in homeschooling and it had nothing to do with the kids, I'm like, don't even talk to me. I don't have time for that. But if he says we need to do this for the kids, bing, he has my attention. I'm like, okay, fine. What is it that you want to tell me, right? And so when we talk to women, I think we just need to get to the more practical level, because do we all know how the internet works? No, we don't. Everybody uses it though. So we don't need to tell the women all the going ons behind the scenes of how the layer one works and layer two works. And then there's like layer three or two and a half, and there's liquid and there's lightning, all that stuff. I'm like, okay, great. Really, all you have to convince them of is this is worthy of your time to at least investigate. And once they are convinced that this can be a money standard, then that's as far as some people need to go. And then it's just application. What does that mean for my kids? If I'm saving for her college, if I'm saving for a wedding, if I'm just trying to manage my budget, if I'm, trying to save up for a home, if my kids, they're at an age where they're starting their adult life. And I talked to my son who just got married. I'm like, well, how are you going to buy a house? With today's housing prices going like crazy and the salary not keeping up, how are you going to buy a house? So we talk about more practical things like that. Like he does not care that our national debt has reached whatever number, and all the people are like, uproar and like, oh my God, what does that mean for us? He doesn't care about that, but he cares about how long it's going to take for him to save up for a down payment to buy a house so he can move in with his wife. So men talk more big things as they are genetically like predisposed to do, and that's fine. And then women get more practical, and that's what we're predisposed. And this is, I'm generalizing again, and that's okay too, because we need both. So that's what I have noticed.
So meet people where they are. That's the
Exactly.
key. Meet people where they are.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your free market kids. So are they? Is it games mainly for kids? And it's was Hodl Up your first game? And is that about mining or is that about everything Bitcoin?
Okay, so the first game actually was not Huddle Up. It was Is That the Best You Can Do,
Okay.
which we created when our kids were little, and it's meant to demonstrate how price moves in a free market. So if you have changes in supply and demand, what does that mean for the price? Because what we wanted to do was we wanted to create a game environment where through interacting in the game, within the game, the kids would deduct the lessons learned themselves, because then they'll retain it, and you don't have, and they'll be interested in it anyway. So mostly when people are taught economic principles, they go right into the history of it, and then they go into the different theories, right? And then right away they jump into graphs and equations, which, for some kids that's great, but for kids that are not going to economics, it's just like a sure way of killing their interest in any particular subject, right? Like, you want to kill the love of a subject, give them a lecture and give them a quiz. You'll kill it dead really quick, right? So we wanted to avoid that. We wanted our kids to learn while they're playing a game. So that was is that the best you can do. Hodl Up Scott created, like I said before, to convince me to go into Bitcoin with him. So it covers just the fundamental concepts of Bitcoin, the fact that there are only 21 million ever, the fact that there are halvings, the fact that the algorithm goes through difficulty adjustments, how transactions are made, how rewards are earned through the blocks. So very basic principles. And within 30 to 45 minutes of playing the game, you get the general gist. And I always tell people, here's the order of learning Bitcoin. You read Price of Tomorrow to understand that there is a big problem. You play Hodl Up, and that's just for fun. Have like a margarita and make some popcorn, and you celebrate every halving. This is just for fun. Then you read either Inventing Bitcoin, or Scott actually collected all of his notes into 21 lessons of Bitcoin, and that's based on all the components of the game, and he translates what the components are into real life. So you can read his book or Inventing Bitcoin, which I think you can get for free from one of the websites. So that's the order that we always tell people to go: Price of Tomorrow, Hodl Up, and then some small book that explains Bitcoin. And that basically gives you a great foundation for just the base layer. And then Scott created Channel Up to explain the Lightning layer, because Lightning started to go into people's conversations like maybe a year and a half ago. Everybody was talking about the Lightning layer and how we needed it, and it needs to make smaller transactions faster and easier and everything. And I went to all these talks, and I kind of like very fuzzy understood what they were saying. And especially when they were talking about liquidity management, inbound, outbound management, I was like, I don't understand why it's not just like the banks, where you swipe a credit card and it doesn't matter. It just goes through. And until he created Channel Up, and he said, hey, can you play this prototype for me? And I played, and it was just the prototype. It wasn't the finished game. It was the prototype. And I played it, and I'm like, oh, that's what they're talking about. That's what their struggle is. And it's just like, there's nothing else on the market that would explain the Lightning layer the way that this game does. And I'm not even saying it because Scott created it. I'm actually saying it because as a student, I just would not have understood the challenges of that second layer. And then Bib 39 is just a fun party game, because we don't want everything to be so serious. So Bib 39 is like a guess who kind of game. And we're really demonstrating entropy, so you have the C phrases that would secure your cold wallet, 12 words. And you're like, how can 12 words be good enough to, secure your cold wallet? And then you can show them with calculations, or you can just say, let's play this game. And this is a very, very, very simplified version of what's happening. And so Bib 39 is like, you pull out an oracle, pulls out 3 cards, puts them in a certain order. All the words are animal related, so it's kind of fun. And then you just have players guess what these words might be with like questions that can help you eliminate the choices. So just it's through deduction that you start to narrow down all the possibilities. And so you can toggle entropy, or you can just do it as a fun party game, because always our games should be fun is number one, and the lessons are icing on the cake. So those are the games. And then next year we're rolling out another game called Fed Up. And Fed Up is based on the Federal Reserve and the clown world, as a lot of people call it. And that one's going to be a really fun party game as well.
Cool. Those are really good names. I'll put the links to the website below.
Okay.
How much do you think about Bitcoin price?
I don't, honestly. I don't. Like, I know people who have apps on the front of their, like the home screen on their phone, and they're looking at it every day. I don't. I'll be like, hey, Scott, what's the Bitcoin price today? I don't know. Like,
You're here for the revolution.
yes. Yeah, we are. We
Yeah,
are, because if you look at the prices, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
you're right.
And
Yeah,
it's part of the equation, but it's not the whole equation. So
yeah. So I just for our last question, I like to ask. So Bitcoin represents freedom to a lot of people. What does
Mhm.
freedom mean to you?
Freedom means I make my decisions without considering third party involvement. I
Love
want to,
that.
yeah, I want to make my own choices. I don't want other people telling me how and how much and where and why and, all that stuff. It's just, if I
And,
think it's right, I should be able to do it.
and do you feel more free since you've adopted Bitcoin?
No, I don't. You know why?
Why?
Because I didn't realize how unfree we were before. And now my eyes are opened. And I feel more restricted now than I have ever felt. And all of these attacks on, the heads of the dragons, I call them, like when they go after CEOs of freedom tech companies, if you're blind to it, you can still go on your merry life and you can just be like, all we care about is, the election, and do you like Trump? Do you not like Trump? Like, no, there's more serious stuff going on that's going to affect you in a much more profound way and longer than 4 years. And most people don't even know it's happening. So I don't feel more free. I have the hope that one day we will, but I think there's a battle and it's not going to be an easy one. I don't think people are just going to be suddenly like, oh, Bitcoin's good, let's go. I don't think so. I think it's going to take some fighting.
We got a battle, but there's hope.
There's hope. I don't think that we should underestimate the battle part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tali. It was wonderful and loved hearing a different perspective.
thank you for having me. That was really fun.